Hello everyone, I'm Charna Wiese and welcome to UCF Profiles. Today we're going to talk about all kinds of health issues and information for women. Now guys, don't change the channel because this affects you too if there's a woman in your life anywhere. Joining me today is Dr. Leslie Lieberman, and she is the founding director of the Women's Resource. I knew I was going to do
There is a resource center in town.
Research center. You know, that's my old speech impediment from when I was a child. The Women's Research Center, and we're going to be talking about all these different things. And Dr. Lieberman is an anthropologist, and the things that we're going to delve into the background of us as humans and where we've come now and how it affects our health is going to be really interesting. So you're going to want to keep the channel on this. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Charna.
Let's talk about obesity first. Now, you were starting to tell me something that I have never heard of before. And let me get this right. The Darwinian theory leading to obesity, as in Charles Darwin, evolutionary theories?
Right, evolution. There's a whole area called Darwinian or evolutionary medicine that looks at our biological history as a way of informing medicine about why we might have the current diseases and conditions that we have today.
What we're doing to go against what we're naturally inclined to do, possibly?
Something like that. Some people have conceptualized it as Stone Age genes in a space age environment. And so we are indeed conditioned by about 98% of our evolutionary history as hunters and gatherers, living in harsh environments, not knowing where the next meal is coming from, having to expend a lot of energy to get it. And so genetically, physiologically, biochemically, psychologically, and behaviorally, we're really geared to not expending a lot of energy, being kind of lazy, liking convenience, and when food's presented to us, eating as much as we can.
It's really very, very different from what we may be programmed to do.
Absolutely. And so we're in an environment today, a modern environment, where we don't expend a lot of energy getting food. We can sit in our cars and drive through and it comes through the window of our car, or we can telephone and the pizza's delivered to our door, so we spend little time in preparation. We may throw something into the microwave. So getting food is no longer a very energetically expensive way to live. And we also then have lots of food available to us. Food processing has allowed lots of caloric and nutrient density in foods. So we eat a lot, it's easy to get, and in this environment we're just getting fatter and fatter.
Well, you even see that in our pets.
Yes, absolutely.
You really don't see an obese alley cat.
Very
or an
rarely.
obese dog, because they're living, I guess, the way they're programmed to live.
Right, and as you know, we responded to this by having various products on the market that are low in calorie for our various pets who are obese.
Isn't
and
that
they too
absurd?
are on diets.
It's really amazing that we're doing it to our animals as well.
They might be more successful dieting our dogs than we are ourselves.
So the theory is that in the caveman days, that we didn't know if there was going to be food, so you ate
or how
when
much.
You could.
Right, exactly.
And then maybe went for periods of not eating. So probably overall, over the month, let's say, you didn't take in as many calories as we do every day in this land of plenty.
Almost every hour, since food's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
And we barely walk anywhere or do any. Most of our physical exercise, it seems, has to be something that we plan to do.
Absolutely. It's not part of our daily routine, although there have been some work site interventions to try to get people to walk up the stairs rather than taking the elevators or escalators.
That doesn't last long.
People like convenience, and we are naturally programmed to really conserve our energy, because in the past we really needed it. It was really for survival.
So now we're doing all this. We are sitting and we are eating, and we were sitting and eating some more, and maybe that is the thought, is what is making this obesity epidemic?
That's part of it. There are a couple of other things going on as well. As omnivores, where we actually have a digestive system that we can digest many different types of foods, there's a real desire to have diversity in the diet, and certainly in this age of globalization with modern marketing, We have lots of different foods to choose from. And this is more than just choice. There's a basic psychological property. Brian Wansek, who's now at Cornell, actually in marketing, has done some very, very clever experiments. So he's shown that people who are presented with more varieties of colors, more colors of M&Ms, and you know they all taste the same regardless of color, are going to eat much more, maybe 40% more if you have 10 colors versus 7 colors. He's shown that individuals who have larger quantities, and you know how we're supersizing everything today, from beverages to burgers to popcorn, even giving people large bags of popcorn that are 14 days old, stale popcorn, so you know it's not taste. They're going to eat about 1/3 more in those giant popcorn bags.
It's almost like
buckets.
It's a splurge and you're allowing yourself this.
Right, and it's an idea, maybe there's a certain amount we need to eat. So people will eat much less if you give them a half-pound bag of M&Ms than a full-pound bag of M&Ms. It also points to lots of other experiments that show we're very insensitive to satiety or being full. Again, from an evolutionary perspective, that makes sense because you want to override that and eat as much as you could when food was available.
Because it was good. You're having the feast now, the famine comes later. It's so funny you say that because I always tell my kids, and it's very hard with one of them at least, to explain to them, you know, we'd all love to eat the cookies all day long. Mm-hmm. And I try to get them to understand the difference between hunger and appetite. And that's very hard. It's an ongoing process. Are you really hungry, or you just think that cake looks really good?
Well, and in fact, we're really, on any level that you look, all of the hormones and enzymes and even the cephalic phase of digestion, where we start seeing something and think about, we start salivating and stomach juices start pumping out. We really are programmed to eat. With all of the controls on satiety and hunger, we're really quite sensitive to hunger and not very sensitive to satiety, to being full, the cessation of eating. So even though you're full and something looks really good because we are primates and we're focusing on vision, we'll tend to really start thinking about food and desiring that particular food. And buffets are probably the worst for dieters, because you do have this range of different foods, and we all naturally want
a little bit of everything.
A little bit of this, and
a plate that big.
Exactly, and so we really desire to be omnivorous and try many things. We're curious. Humans are very curious about food.
And the problem about this is not something that we're talking about in terms of cosmetic. You know, you'll be overweight and you won't like the way you look. This is a health issue. Mm-hmm.
It is a health issue, and as you know, there are many health problems associated with obesity. When I was at the University of Florida, I was also in the Department of Pediatrics and Pediatric Endocrinology, where diabetes continues to be my specialty as well today. But in that practice, we saw children with juvenile onset or type 1 diabetes, which is actually an autoimmune disease. But over the last decade and a half, that patient population really changed to an increasing number of children with type 2, we used to call adult onset diabetes. And the primary reason they had it was obesity. So you'd have children who were 4 years of age and over 100 pounds, 8-year-olds at 200 pounds, 16-year-olds at 400 pounds. So these are the extremes, but certainly obesity now is showing up in children and adolescents, and along with the obese condition, all of these other conditions, heart disease, diabetes,
high
joint
cholesterol
problems,
in children,
all of the lipidemias, high cholesterol, high triglycerides, high blood pressure.
And you can't blame the child. You know, they're probably teased in school, but somebody is bringing that into the house, and somebody's allowing them to make the wrong choices. But it may also be a whole educational level that people aren't really educated about nutrition.
People know a lot about nutrition,
really?
And it's very interesting. It doesn't factor into their choices, into their eating behavior. There's a big disconnect between knowledge and behavior, and it's the behavior that has the evolutionary component to it. We are programmed to eat.
So how do we combat that?
Well,
that's the hardest part.
Since it's a problem which is relatively recent, it's really an environmental problem. There's always there's always an interaction of genes and environment. But that really means to me that one has to change the environment. And again, I'm really echoing what many other people have investigated. And so there are lots of good suggestions. One suggestion, of course, is portion size, and some of that can.
When you think about it, you know, the portions you get, especially everybody's eating out. You're right. The supersize, everything is supersized.
40% of adults are eating U.S. adults are eating in a restaurant every day, and kids often have 2 meals a day out. They have the breakfast and lunch at school. And
it doesn't cost very much to supersize it or to get the bigger portion.
Very inexpensive.
So you're thinking this is economically a good idea.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we definitely do want to get the amount for our money.
About a couple of years ago, a book came out. I'm trying to remember what it's called. I think it was like Why French Women Don't Get Fat or something. Do you know which book I'm talking about?
Yes, but they are getting fatter now. It's a sad truth. They are. But they do also have smaller portion sizes.
That was the whole book was about portion control.
But there are 2 other things that are going along, that are also important when you think about French and obesity, French men, French women and obesity. One is that they live in an environment which is much less convenient than ours. So housing, for example, maybe the car is parked in a separate garage which is a block away from your home. So even though it's a little bit, only a block, you're doing that perhaps 2 or 3 or 4 times a day. You actually are forced to get exercise. People live in walk-ups, 5 floors up, no elevator. So there are parts of the environment in France that necessitate more daily energy expenditure. Also, the French like food. They like food quality, and it's a value in terms of eating that Americans don't have. Americans really like quantity. We'll talk about quality, but given a trade-off, we really tend to go for quantity, whereas French food really focuses on quality. So a smaller portion that's really excellently prepared and beautifully presented is valued over a larger portion, which may be not quite as tasty.
What's that old joke? The food is so terrible. Oh yes, in such small portions. But it is. It's kind of almost our culture. We want more and more and more and more and more of everything. Even the toys that are marketed to children. You know, you buy one and you go on the website and you play with it. But if you get another one, you get to go a little bit further. We're just so programmed for more and more and more and more. And there's so much money made on it. I can't imagine anything changing that. It almost has to be a personal decision.
It does, and we find that packaging, for example, so you have this large 6-ounce muffin, and if you flip it over and read food labels, which we always urge people to do, you see that it's really 3 portions, but it's packaged as 1. A pot pie packaged as a single serving. We would never think of dividing that up. You flip it over and it's really for 2. So there's really a lot of deception in packaging versus what the U.S. Department of Agriculture refers to as serving sizes. These are not single serving sizes.
Right, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we come back. We're back. We're talking with Dr. Leslie Lieberman, and we were in the middle about talking about obesity and portion size and all of that. You know, the old thing that if a piece of meat should be about the fit in your palm of your hand.
Right, the deck of cards. Yeah.
I mean, you get a sandwich at a restaurant, it's twice that.
Absolutely. And then you can make the decision to go ahead and share that with your lunch companion, so you only order 1 sandwich and you share it, or you can take it home, and we're very good at carting home doggy bags. The other thing at home is that you can use plates that are smaller. we have this visual image of how much should be appropriate on a plate, how that plate should look, kind of these normative values about the amount of food that you want to eat. So by using a smaller plate, you have smaller portions that still fill the space of the plate. And there's some very good experiments that show larger plates people are consuming more, just like larger packages of food. The spoon that you use teaspoons. So these are changes in your environment at home, for example, that only take a one-time change. You swap out your large dinner plates for smaller dessert plates. You swap out your large teaspoons and soup spoons and tablespoons for teaspoons or smaller spoons. And these really make a difference in the amount that people are consuming.
We touched on a little bit about why this is so important and what obesity contributes to. Cancer?
Absolutely, both in men and women, and certainly contributes, and we don't know exactly what that proportion of contribution is, but certainly to breast cancer and other reproductive cancers, uterine cancers, ovarian cancers, are clearly related to obesity. It's one of many risk factors.
Some of the other things that are out lately and have been looked at for a long time, but are brought to public attention again, talking about breast cancer. Now that we're that little segue, you know,
okay.
Breast cancer and depression.
Yes, this is our 5th year for sponsoring a UCF breast cancer update, and we're happy to work with the College of Nursing on this and give nursing CEUs continuing education credits. Each year we have a different focus, and this year I decided it would be very interesting to look at the whole issue of chemo brain, which has come into the popular press. These are changes in cognitive function. It can be short-term memory, long-term memory, abstract reasoning that are related to chemotherapies and radiation. Along with that, also some of the other problems with chemotherapy include changes in neurotransmitters and hormones related to anxiety and depression. So this year we focused on CAD, coping with CAD, CCAD, cognitive changes, anxiety, and depression. And we brought together as our keynote speakers a clinical pharmacist who could tell us how these very potent cancer drugs are working, a clinical psychologist who works with patients who have anxiety and depression about their disease or the reoccurrence of it or their fatigue issues, or brought on as a consequence of the chemotherapy and other adjuvant therapies that they continue to take after the initial chemotherapies, and also the anxiety. And we also had one of our own nurse oncologist who's worked with primarily cancer survivors. So we're having more women who are surviving, which means we need to pay more attention to the period of quality, to the period of survivorship, which is longer, and the quality of life issues. Much of the focus has been on just killing the cancer. We love wars. We have wars on drugs, war on poverty, war on cancer, and there are lots of metaphors. But as a consequence of war, Americans pay little attention to the sort of collateral damage. And part of the collateral damage, even though we're getting better drugs to target the cancers, these drugs and radiation also kill off some of the healthy cells and also make for changes, physiological, neurochemical changes that are long-lasting. We see this in fatigue. We see this in some neuropathy. We see this in a variety of other cognitive and affect changes.
And sometimes the patient actually has to take a look and monitor when they're feeling, what they're feeling, how intense it is, what it comes after, or even when it comes to depression. Are you sad or is it depression? There's a big difference. One makes perfect sense, and the other is something that you might be able to get. You can get help for either one, but with a depression, it's something that actually. It's actually a physical. It's almost like an illness that you can get help for.
Well, I'm not sure that you can get help. The same day that we had our breast cancer update looking at these issues, the Institute of Medicine, which is part of the National Academies of Sciences, issued a report that indicated only 8 of the top 20 cancer centers in the country deal with depression. on a regular basis. Even though there are some diagnostic instruments that can look at the depression and the extent of the depression and anxiety, these are rarely used. So part of our workshop was to really introduce nurses to some of these instruments and some of the techniques they could use to be aware of and to diagnose the possibility of anxiety and depression, and then refer their patients to a psychologist or psychiatrist.
For the person, for the woman herself, for the patient herself, are there things to look for to say, well, this is regular sadness or is this depression? Does this depression have like a sense of hopelessness?
It has a sense of hopelessness, and it persists for a long time, and it's more global usually than specific. We sometimes expect it. Obviously, one would be depressed if your body has somehow riled against you in terms of producing these cancers. You feel as though you've been betrayed. That's a frequently notion that women have.
Out of control.
Out of control. But some of it can be controlled through various other drugs as well as psychotherapies.
So that could really help them as well.
That could really help. And there are various strategies for dealing with cognitive. Obviously, one might become depressed if you can't remember things, and you've been used to really controlling and having a good memory and balancing and juggling a wide variety of different activities and intellectual activities. And so there's a notion of keeping lists or using electronic PDA or some other approaches that you can implement to help increase the quality of life and level of functioning.
Because the truth is your life will never be the same, no matter what your outcome is. Even if it's an outcome you could have never prayed for something better. I mean,
you've survived.
You've survived it. It's gone, but it's going to change your life forever. Sometimes they say, people women I've known who've gone through it say that after the initial shock and the initial dealing with it, it changes their life for the better. They appreciate more. Do more, put themselves out there. My best friend had dealt with this, and I don't think I've lived in 20 years as much as she would in a year. Yeah,
it's true. It really does change people's lives. I think my own experience with a friend has been that she just marveled at the fact that her friends gathered together, so that the importance of friendship became really paramount to her, and that was really a revelation. That she had friends who would really come forward and help her during her time of need.
And you know what, that's also helpful for the people around you. You know, I look at the world in a better way, and I try to see how I react towards things and make choices based on what I learned watching her with her struggle as well.
Yes, I think we all benefited from her disease, from her experience.
How about some of the studies that are now looking at the possibility of depression as possibly leading to cancer, rather than a cause rather than an effect of cancer?
Yeah, I think we're moving away from the notion that we have this dichotomous model where the body is separate from the mind. We do know that experiences, psychological states, influence the whole hormonal milieu, the neurochemical milieu, and that this can be influential in terms of carcinogenesis, causing cancers, or changing the way cell metabolism operates.
The whole immune system.
The whole immune system, attacking cells that seem different. It can blunt that type of immune reaction. So it's not my area of specialty, so I hesitate to talk a little bit about it, but certainly the mind-body interaction is one that we're really learning about more and more through a variety of imaging techniques, for example, where we can pose certain questions or problems and see that the brain is activated in different regions, or various micro techniques for looking at these small changes in the small chemical changes in the human body that are related to emotions.
That always leads me back to whenever I would ever do some kind of story on women's health, cancer or diabetes, or really anything, it comes back to, and we're all guilty of it, is that as women, we tend to get treatment later, we tend to get diagnosed later because we put ourselves last. You know, I've got to do this first. I've got to take care of everybody else first. And that's also probably part of the whole mindset in taking care of yourself
Yes.
and looking after, what's that's the whole thing, if mama ain't happy, nobody's happy.
Right, right.
And that's probably such an important thing that we all put off until tomorrow.
That's very true. And in some groups in the United States, among some of the Hispanic Latino groups and among some African American women, I think that's even more so. We find that in those particular populations, there's even a higher proportion of women who have a later diagnosis of breast cancer and therefore poorer outcomes because of the perceived and real roles of women in those populations. They have traditional roles, plus they're working full-time. They may not have all the help at home that they might need. And so one of the issues in terms of not taking care of yourself is not getting an early diagnosis, particularly with breast cancer. And as the caregivers, we're often not very good at being on the other end as the care receivers. But sometimes we don't perceive that there are people who are there for us who are the caregivers.
And it hurts them when you don't let them.
And it hurts them when they don't let them. So I guess that's the message, right? We need to let people help us.
So take care of yourself, let people help you, and be in tune to your body.
Yeah.
Dr. Leslie Lieberman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And I hope you come and join us again sometime.
Thank you very much.
And I hope you do too. We'll see you next time on UCF Profiles.